Hello and welcome to Perfectly Paranormal, episode 54. My name's Annaschmidt, and I'm here every week to share with you true paranormal encounters and information about devils, demons and dark energy beings that no one else talks about. And today we're exploring graveyards, and boy do I have some interesting stories for you. I have one of mine from the very early days. It was rather a hair-raising nighttime experience, and I had what I would say was a shocking encounter, literally. And there's another time being gently pushed out of a graveyard during the day by an unseen objector. We're also going to look at, do spirits hang around their graves for all of eternity, and why graveyards scare the bejeekers out of people. Now today we're going to kick off with my rather interesting nighttime experience, which I've called the Graveyard Shocker. Now some friends and I often spent a lot of time roaming around dark buildings at night, but we never really had the chance to visit cemeteries. Until one day we were at the other end of Tasmania for a work event, and we thought, why not pop down to the local cemetery and visit some of the local spirits? Now, when we arrived to the local cemetery, the rickety old gate was open, so we assumed that it was okay to enter. Now, there was no one else there, living, that is. And it was around about midnight, so we just kind of slipped in very quietly and just parked the car. This graveyard, or cemetery, there is a difference, but I can never remember the difference between the two. This graveyard was very, very quiet. Like it was really quiet. And I was thinking to myself, where do you start exploring in a graveyard? Well, for me, I love the old headstones. The older, the better. The writing, the decorations, just the way they're carved. Like I have this really fascinating interest in the artwork and the time and the dedication that has been put into making these loving memorials for people who have passed. Now, while I'm trying to balance the torchlight and take some photos of this rather old, ornate headstone, the others went off in a group and they had their K2s in a spirit box to see if they could hear some voices of any of the local spirit residents. And they would use their K2 EMF detector to see if they could catch some movement, to catch a change in the energy around them. We went our separate ways, as I just said, but we were also within around about sort of 60 metres of each other. And I could hear their giggles and their laughing, and I could see their torches the torchlights kind of dancing around in the distance. So I felt quite safe being sort of off by myself because I could see where the others were. Now, like I just said, I was quite happy wandering around by myself, and I was kind of fumbling around in the dark because I'm not very steady on my feet in the dark. And as I was focusing on taking a photo of this lovely old ornate cross from somewhere within sort of the 1800s, I heard a voice. Now, it wasn't my friends because I could see their 3 torches sort of off in the distance. This was someone else. Now, this voice, I wasn't sure if it was actually in my head or someone behind me because it was so clear. And it wasn't a very nice voice. And what it said was, "Turn around." Now, this was in a really sort of raspy horror movie type fashion, as I tried to demonstrate. Now, I stopped. I kind of shook my head slightly and I thought, I can't hear anyone behind me because you would hear rustling, you would hear footsteps. You can feel the presence of a person, like a living person behind you. Then I thought, well, I'm not upsetting anyone. I'm being very quiet. I'm being very respectful. I'm not stepping on anyone's grave. I'm just taking some photos in a very quiet fashion. Now, I'm kind of used to hearing creepy whisperings in the daytime and sometimes the nighttime in my house. And I've learned to just observe and not react to them. Now, I slowly moved away from that headstone as I figured maybe I probably annoyed one of the local spirits. Maybe that was the person whose headstone I was taking a photo of. And in my head and with my mouth, I said, look, I'm sorry if I've disturbed you. I'm going to move away now. Now, the voice followed me and it kept repeating its really creepy message, turn around, turn around. And it was starting to kind of freak me out a bit. And I was very casually sort of moving towards my friends, sort of dodging all the headstones and walking around the graves with the little fences around them. It was really quite a tricky situation to be in the middle of the night with one torch that wasn't very good. I should have taken a better one. Now, you're going to find this really, really interesting. I'm just slowly moving, like I said. And I'm thinking in my head, now what did this voice want? Did it want to frighten me? Did it want to hurt me? If it was a dark being, did it want to feed on my soul? Nah, just joshing. Sorry, I just got lost in the moment. So I just kind of started to walk away a little bit faster now. Now I'd managed to navigate my way to the walkway. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I felt one of the worst electric shocks I've ever had in my whole life. Now, this shock hit me in the middle of my right calf muscle, and my leg was pulsing from my ankle to halfway up my thigh. And I'm seriously embarrassed to say now that I screamed. You'll very rarely hear me say that I scream in a paranormal moment. Well, this was such a sudden shock, and it was really quite painful. And all of a sudden, the dancing torchlights in the distance stopped. And within about 10 seconds, I could see them moving towards me in a very quick-paced fashion. And the three ladies pulled up out of breath. They're shining their torches in my face, and they're kind of looking at me sitting on the ground like, well, what's going on? What happened? Did you fall? No, was my response. I said, something shocked me. And I'm pointing to the direction where this shock came from. And I said it was like an electric cattle prod type of electric shock, times 100. And they're looking at each other going, yeah, she's exaggerating. And I'm just looking at them going, no, I can see what you're thinking. No, I'm not exaggerating. And I'm pointing, like they're saying, where did this happen? And they've got their torches shining over in that direction. They couldn't see anyone. I said it wasn't a living person. And they're looking at me again like I'm a bit of a fruitcake. I said it wasn't someone living. I didn't hear anyone walk up behind me. No one touched me or pushed me in any way. I just felt this very strong electric shock. Now, in the meantime, they're looking at each other, they're talking to each other. I just got up, brushed myself down. I rubbed my leg. I was able to walk okay. It was just pulsing a bit. I've had a few electric shocks from these beings over the many years of doing this work, but that would have had to have been one of the worst. Now, as I bent down to get my torch, one of my friends, who is super, super curious about the dark energy beings, just had to go and check out that spot. It was about 4 meters away from where we were standing now. And we were just all standing there shining torches at each other. My friend, like I said, who was about 4 meters away, let out this sudden bunch of very angry swear words. And she came hobbling back to us, holding the back of her thigh. And she said that beep, 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 zapped me. And we just looked at each other. Now, we were stunned, no pun intended. And all 4 of us just made a very quick dash to the car. Now, while strapping on our seatbelts, one lady said, you sure did upset someone. And I'm looking at her going, no, but I didn't. I didn't upset anyone. I was just taking photos. Now, when I backtracked in my mind about my walking around this cemetery, this graveyard that night, I couldn't find anything that I could have done to upset anyone, living or non-living. Now, these 3 thoughts came to my mind. Had I stumbled upon a dark being who was feeding on emotional or trauma imprints in that very spot in the graveyard? And it had all of a sudden felt very threatened, and its favourite tactic was to use electric shocks to scare living people. Or, another possibility, was it an upset spirit resident? I don't really think it was, because spirits don't tend to attack us in such a really aggressive way. We might get a poke or a slight push, or you might feel a wafting breeze. But spirits don't normally use those sort of tactics. Now, that's only from my perspective, only from what I've experienced. Now, the other thing, the third possibility, was it a spirit caretaker? Now, I've come across this at another time, which I'm going to share very soon. Spirit caretakers are often there watching over the graveyard, watching over their cemetery, where they worked when they were living. And they're carrying on their duty. And did they feel that maybe we were being disrespectful intruders? Or this being, whatever it was, just wanted to make its feelings known to us? Or the other thing that's just come to mind, did this being think that I was going to do an energetic clearing of the cemetery, of the graveyard? Because I find this a lot now, is that I can't go anywhere without being affronted by these waves of angry beings who think I'm going to clear out people's homes that I visit, or shopping centres, or I don't know, movie theatres, or anywhere I go. And I just simply say, look, sorry, not interested. Just go back to what you're doing. I'm here for a visit. If I'm in a shopping centre, I'm here to do some shopping. Just go about what you're doing. I don't care what you're up to. Off you go. Bye-bye. Now, I guess we're never going to know what was in the cemetery unless I go back there one day, which I very possibly could do. Now, the voice didn't follow us to the car or to our accommodation. So that said to me that it was solely connected to that cemetery. Now, on the subject of spirit caretakers, like I mentioned earlier, my next experience wasn't quite so shocking, but nonetheless at the time, I definitely upset someone here in a local country town in southern Tasmania. Now, I've called this experience the Graveyard Guardian. Now, I occasionally get the urge to make my way to this very old cemetery here in Hobart. Now, it's only convict times, so we're looking at sort of the 1788 onwards. It is almost like a year, like it's a yearly pilgrimage that I do when I go to this place. I don't know why I am drawn to go to these places. I think it's like I mentioned earlier, I really love the old headstones. Very tactile. They've got a lot of feeling in them. Someone has carved that by hand. Like, I'm a very tactile person, so I will go, I ask permission to touch them, I'll read the writing, I'll say hello to the person's name if I can still read it. So it's just one of the things that I like to do sometimes. Now, one very hot summer afternoon, I chose to sit next to an old stone monument. And I had a paranormal investigation gadget with me, and I turned it on. As much as I do the psychic work and I use my paranormal senses, I do love to see the gauges move and sometimes to hear the sounds and to see the lights flicker. It's just a very human thing that we all enjoy. Now, like I said, I had this gadget, I turned it on, and I just sat it next to me. Now, it's one of those devices that has flickering lights, and the spirits seem to know, it's like something that they all seem to know, is that one flicker is for yes, and two flickers means no. And then this one has a gauge on the front that can move once for yes, twice for no. And the spirits just seem to really, really like this gadget. And it's one of my favourites, so occasionally I'll take it to different places where I go. Now, I was enjoying the peaceful afternoon sunshine and just sitting quietly, and just watching other people wandering around, exploring the very old lopsided headstones, when suddenly the gauge flickered. Now, it's only a very small needle, but it flickered quite sharply, and I was like, ooh, I was quite excited, because when it flickers quite sharply, that's someone who really wants your attention. I looked at the device, and the red light at the front flashed. Now, it flashed once, which was a yes, but I hadn't even asked a question yet. So maybe it was a spirit or another being just wanting me to know that they were present. Now, being an electromagnetic energetic reader, you would normally do some debunking before you would get too excited about it being something paranormal, because these devices can read electromagnetic energy in homes, buildings, other locations, sometimes within the earth where there's cables. But this was a very, very old cemetery, and I was sitting like 100 metres at least from the little house that was attached to the church that was near the graveyard. So I just sat and I observed this device, and I asked a few questions. But whoever was operating it wasn't very happy. Like, it was flicking very quickly, the gauge was moving very sharply, and I heard, quite brashly in my head, I heard this voice say, "Get out!" And I was like, ooh, I think I've offended someone. Like, I wasn't doing anything wrong. But that's only our perspective. That is not necessarily the perspective of spirits or the spirit caretakers that can be in these graveyards or cemeteries. Or was it a local pastor spirit that was roaming around the cemetery wondering why people were looking and sitting and being disrespectful? But anyway, let's get back to what I was saying. Now, this device flickered once more. Have I offended you? And I got a very strong flicker of yes. And I asked, are you a spirit? And I got a yes. So this is where I like doing the detective work. And I asked, did you live here in this little town? And I got kind of like a wavering yes, no. I don't think the spirit actually lived in the town, but I think more so, as we'll find out later, was connected to this cemetery in some way. I think that it's about time for me to move on. And I'd been there for an hour or so, and I thought it was best to just move on and go home. So I said goodbye to whoever this rather irritated spirit was, and I started to head to the car. Now, as I was passing the church, now I can't help myself. As much as I love observing and looking in cemeteries and graveyards, I also love observing the convict-built churches that we have here in Tasmania. They are just beautiful. Sometimes I'll go and I'll just sit. I'll just go in and just sit with my eyes shut, just feel the energy of the building. And I've had a few pastors and a few priests that have come up. This is in spirit form, and I felt very strong nudges like, get out, get out. And I'm like, I'm not hurting anyone. Please respect me as much as I am respecting the space. And they tend to back off then. Passing this church, as I started to say, there was no one else around. Like, there was no cars, there was no people. I couldn't hear anyone inside the church. So I thought I might just go and sit in the church for 10 to 15 minutes and see if there's any spirits about. Well, this spirit caretaker, as I'd nicknamed him, followed me into the church. I'm sure he was quite affronted by the fact that I said I was leaving and I didn't go. So I very quietly walked in, sat in one of the pews, sort of midway up the church. And in my head, I heard the name Charles. Now, I don't get names very often. And when I heard Charles, I wasn't thinking about Charles. I don't know anyone named Charles. I haven't watched any movies lately with anyone named Charles in it. Don't have any family members with that name. So here I am doing all the debunking. The only thing it could be was that the spirit that was in the cemetery is also Charles, who's followed me into the church. Now, I did ask and I got a yes. So I didn't hear anything more. There were no more names or words said at that time. So I'm just kind of sitting there. And I thought, will I be cheeky and pull out my paranormal investigation device and sit it next to me? Now, it doesn't make sounds. It's literally just the light flickering and the gauge. So I didn't feel like I was being disrespectful. So I snuggled it up close to me because as I was doing this, there were some other people coming into the church. Because it's a historic church, people will come not so much to use it as a church anymore, but just to come and observe the construction of the building, the convict-made structure, and just really enjoy the energy of the building because it really is one of the loveliest churches here in Tasmania. So I'm sitting there with my device and it's turned on. And it's flickering like really fast, like not yes or no. It's just like flicker, 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 and the gauge is going flat out. And I'm like, he's annoyed. He is annoyed. I think I need to go. So as I'm getting up, I heard Major in my head. Now, I don't normally get names, but I was listening, so Charles Major. And I went, oh, okay. So I said, it's very nice to meet you, Mr. Charles Major. And this is what I was saying as I was leaving, because the words carry a stronger vibration. They carry the energy that you're trying to say. So as I was going out the door, I said, thank you, Mr. Charles Major. Thank you for letting me visit the cemetery today. You will see me again, no doubt. I will come for a visit and I will say your name and ask how you are. Now, when I got out to the car, this energy was still with me. Like I could feel it now. It was like if you shut your eyes and someone walks up behind you, you know they're there. You don't actually have to see them or hear their footsteps. You can feel their energy behind you. And I asked Charles, seeing he wanted to talk to me in my head, I thought I'm just going to ask him a couple more questions because I'm a real sticky beak. So I asked Charles, if he worked at the cemetery, and we got the yes. So that confirmed he was some sort of caretaker or guardian of the cemetery. And I asked when. So I whittled down sort of different time frames. We came sort of to the mid to late 1800s. Now, when I got home, this was really interesting. I generally don't go looking for confirming advice. I generally trust what I hear in my head. But I've got a friend who loves doing the genealogy, looking at the ancestry of like the ancestral heritage of Tasmania. So I thought, wouldn't this be interesting if I could verify Charles was working at the cemetery? Now, I looked for ages. I typed in Charles Major, the name of the church, and I looked through all the different documents that came up, but there was no information that I could find. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't true. It could just mean that I wasn't looking in the right place. As I'm writing the notes for this episode, I heard in my head, look online again, because I had Charles's name. And when I said it, I got this sort of little bit of a tingle and I'm like, okay, so does that mean that there is a spirit around me named Charles? Now, it's not necessarily the Charles at this cemetery. It could be another Charles, because, Charles is a very widely used name back in those days and probably is now too. But anyway, I looked online and I didn't manage to verify that Charles worked at the cemetery, but this is really interesting. I did find a document that referenced lots of people that had been buried at that very cemetery. And you'll never guess what I found. Like, this helps me to trust my mediumship skills, which is what I call getting the names of people who have passed. What I found was Major Charles Mackenzie, who'd been buried in that cemetery in 1856. And I went, there you go. I'd got it mixed up. So to him, the Major was his title. But I heard Charles first, and I assumed, in my human way, my human brain, that his name was Charles Major. Next time I go back to visit that lovely old historic cemetery, I'm going to give a very hearty greeting to Major Charles Mackenzie. I'm going to use my device to help back up my psychic skills. And I'm going to see if this is actually the person that is present in that cemetery. Now, I do wonder, did Major Charles object to my extended visit and my questions? Being a military man, he might not like a woman questioning, especially back in those days. Because quite often spirits, when they pass, their thinking and their behaviours are the same as when they were alive. And women in those days wouldn't have been appreciated asking so many nosy questions. Now, did he take it upon himself to look after the church and the graveyard? Was he just saying hello to someone who had finally sensed and heard his name? Or are Charles the caretaker and Major Charles two totally different people? Like I said, I don't do mediumship. I don't see spirits very often, don't usually get names. But as we do more of this psychic development within ourselves, we start to become more attuned to what's around us. And I'm very open to it. I don't doubt. Now, next time I go and give that church a visit, I'm going to have to explore this situation further because I love doing the detective work. And I'm sure either or both of them are going to be there. So I will get back to you and let you know what I find. So now we're going to look at, do spirits hang around their graves for all of eternity? And why do graveyards scare the bejeekers out of people? Quite often, the belief that spirits linger in graveyards, it's got a few different aspects to it. Some of them that I agree with, and some that I sort of like, nah, I don't think that is quite as important to the deceased soul energy that's present here. Now, depending on where you are in the world and what your spiritual, cultural, or religious traditional beliefs are, there's different ways to look at death and the sites that are used for our burials. Now, graveyards serve as a physical anchor, like it's a physical reminder, a place where memories and energies of the departed are concentrated. That's one way to look at it. And in this perspective, spirits can be thought to hover around their final resting places, seeking a sense of connection to the living. But I really think that if spirits are going to be anywhere in the earth realm and they want to connect to the living, especially their family and friends, they're going to go and visit them in their homes. You know, I would think that waiting for family and friends to come and visit you at your gravesite is going to be a very lonely experience. It's going to get pretty boring. If the spirit doesn't particularly like other people, then a graveyard which is full of spirits can most likely get on their nerves. Now, another perspective looks at unfinished business or unresolved emotional issues. Now, I've talked about this before in other episodes. I think it was episode 20 where I talked about why spirits stay. That sometimes spirits can be held here by their emotions. Now, some individuals who pass away suddenly or under very traumatic circumstances sometimes don't know that they've died. And they may get a very rude shock if they're following family members around and they go into a cemetery or a graveyard and they happen upon their own headstone. Like realising that they've left their physical bodies would be really shocking. Like I imagine it would be quite a shock if you didn't know that you'd actually died suddenly. And they may linger at the gravesite just looking for the light because they don't know where to go. How do I find my way to the other side? And they just stay within that space where their physical body has been buried. Now, physically, depending on your beliefs, some say that graveyards themselves are a boundary between the realms of the living and the dead. You know, a friend told me that her family believes that graveyards or cemeteries act as portals where the spiritual and physical worlds intersect. And they believe that their family members come through a portal that is connected to their actual gravesite. Now, that's pretty fascinating. I haven't heard anyone tell me that before. That was the first time that I'd heard that particular perspective. Now, in some traditions around the world, the final resting place is a place of celebration, honouring the ancestors, such as the Day of the Dead, which is celebrated annually in Mexico. And the ancestors are said to come and enjoy the festivities, share of the food, spend time with the relatives, and then return to the afterlife. Like it's a real celebration of the deceased loved ones. I really like that idea. I think that's super, super special. While other cultural beliefs, some that I've found in mainland Australia and New Zealand, hold that their burial sites are sacred ground and not to be disturbed by anyone other than the elders who go there for ceremonial reasons. In my experience, the dark, eerie experiences that people feel in graveyards or cemeteries, they're not spirits. They're not our deceased loved ones, but rather, like I mentioned earlier, just briefly, that they're the dark energy beings that position themselves in these locations in our environment because they gravitate towards despair, grief, sorrow, and sadness. And these beings will stay there Not to annoy people like happened in the first story, unless that being had a particularly nasty sense of humour, which is very possible. But sometimes they stay there just because of the emotional imprints, which are what I call their emotional food. Now, my personal belief is that the body or the ashes of the person's physical remains resides in the earth. It goes back to nature. It goes back to the earth. But their soul energy is free to choose its path, with visiting friends and family members, continuing their spiritual journey, either reincarnating to learn a new lesson or experiencing personal growth, or wafting about in mass consciousness, learning the mysteries of the universe. I have to say that I'm not really in a hurry to leave the earth reality, but sometimes I think I can't wait to see what the universe holds for me when returning to my original energy form. So in episode 55, we are exploring my first-hand experiences with spirit souls who are trapped within the earth realm due to their personal trauma. We're going to look at what keeps them here and how they can be released to find peace on the other side. And I must say that there is a very, very big trigger warning that comes with this episode, as we're going to be hearing 4 traumatic experiences that these spirits want me to share. Okay, as I was writing this episode, I kept seeing and hearing these people, the stories that came to mind from the experiences that I had with them. They're like, I want to be included. I want people to know what I went through. But I will say, all 4 stories have happier endings. Now, the 3 ladies and the 1 gentleman spirit wanted to be heard, so I am honouring their requests to share their stories with those who are willing to listen. So thank you for joining me today. And don't forget, if you want to share a paranormal experience just with myself, or you would like me to share one of your experiences through my podcast, you can do a voice recording, or you can write out your experience and I will read it exactly as you have written. You can email me at spiritualbeing44@gmail.com. And for information on paranormal house clearing, you can visit my website, Spiritual Being. You will find the address in the description box. And I look forward to sharing this spooky space again with you next week. And remember, life is perfectly paranormal.